And that's what you become when you try to be that genius with 1,000 minions is you become the limiting variable to growth in your organization.
Yeah, I'll be careful how I say this, but I heard someone who had talked about clarity with a leader, and a leader said, I like things to be a little bit muddy. And my mind was like, what did you just say? And it was exactly what we're talking about. Muddy so that he remains the bottleneck. I don't want it to be so clear that people don't need me. I like a little muddy where they have to come to me.
And what you're really saying is like, I'm more important than mission. Welcome to the No Limits Leadership Podcast. We discuss ancient wisdom, real world experiences, and the latest concepts on mastering leadership of self and others. If you're committed to maximizing your life and your impact on the world, you're home. Welcome to the No Limits Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Sean Patton, and I am excited to be joined today by Lee Taylor, who's the creator of the Role Clarity Revolution coaching process. And we had a conversation before we even started recording weeks ago, and I enjoyed it so much. I was like, we've got to do this. So I'm excited for our conversation. I think it's going to be very useful for all our listeners. Thanks for being here today, Lee.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I've listened to a couple episodes. I was like, feel pretty honored to get the chance to talk to you and be a part of this. So thank you for letting me join in today.
Of course. Well, hey, let's just jump right into it. So, why Role Clarity? Why is this your mission, and why are you so passionate about it?
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's dive right into this. Yeah. So what I always want to say is so much of this comes from having led teams and led in a nonprofit. I worked in education and having really struggled with this specific thing, and always had big vision, always was excited, loved goal setting. But there was this missing piece that I experienced. I remember I can look back, I found some old files of how I tried to figure out how to do this multiple times in really terrible ways, from job descriptions to other just ideas, brainstorming. So, but it was like the disconnect that I often felt for myself between how do I communicate to my team exactly what it is that I need without it being so elaborate and so confusing that they don't get it, but also, not so simple that it doesn't give them enough clarity to move forward. And so what I came to find was, as I went and I worked with teams and organizations, people were really strong a lot of times on the vision side with a few questions and conversation, they got that. And even then on the goal side and the strategy, hey, what's most important right now? But what bridges those two is our ability to tell the people around us, hey, here's the role that you're going to play in that, and to communicate that simply and succinctly, especially in a small business type setting, in a way that works in their world. And so it kind of came from that. It came from working with teams, the role clarity process. And it's like, if I could help leaders be able to communicate clearly to their teams, I know how much better it would make them. I know how much better it would make their teams. And so, hey, let's spend our time trying to do that.
Well, and I know you brushed over it, but you were, and I don't know the official title, but you were running a whole school, right? Super young. What age were you when you were running an entire private school?
Yeah. So I went to go work at a private school, teaching, doing leadership development around 25, 26. And then right there at 27, they came and they're like, hey, we think that you'd be great for this role. At first I was like, you're wrong. And so I said no at first. And they came back a year later and said, we really think you should. And at that point I stepped into it. So 27 or 28, I actually remember flying out to go meet with another head of school. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Talk to me about what you do. And he was an incredible mentor, and had almost the exact same thing had happened to him. And so, I've spent about 10 years then, leading a private school. It was an incredible journey, incredible run. But learning leadership a lot, the tough ways of, through mess up and the hard knocks.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's an important lesson because I relate to that. One joke we had was when I was in the military, right, was the first role is as a platoon leader. So my first job at 23 was 36 soldiers. We had a 70% turnover because they just got back from a combat rotation. And then 12 months later, we're getting ready to go back to combat. And it's like, there's no place where so much responsibility is given to someone with little experience and training. Because there's only so much especially in leadership, right? The people side that we can learn and read and educate ourselves and go through classes and all that. But there's no real substitute for just the experience involved leading people
Yeah.
and the um, not just leading people, but then also the power of saying yes and having the confidence, I think, that character to like step into the unknown
Yeah.
and be like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm
Yeah.
going to show up and serve, and I'm
Yeah.
going to use the experience as a learning process, because I think there's so many people that are holding themselves back with like their own. There's so many people holding themselves back with their own limited beliefs of saying, "Well, I don't want to take. I'm not sure about the next role because I don't know how to do that role." It's
Yeah.
like no one does. No one knows until you
Yeah.
get there. You have to get there to actually know how to do it. So don't hold yourself back. Like say yes, live in abundance,
Yeah.
and step into the unknown, and just believe in your ability to grow. And that's how I'm sure you grew
Oh
so
yeah.
fast as someone in your 20s, because you took on that mantle of responsibility and leadership and just said, I'm not sure how this is going to go, but I'm going to learn as I do it. And I'm sure that
Yeah.
was reason that you've come to as far as you have in this early part of your career.
Yeah, and I think I think you hit on it so perfectly there is, especially too at that age, if you can match up like the incredible energy and excitement you have with the humility to say, just be okay with like, people know that you don't know. Just don't, just, it's fine to say, hey, I don't know. I'm trying to learn, trying to understand. And that's why if I were ever talking to a young leader, if I had young leaders reach out to me and say, what should I be reading? What should I be doing? Where I point them to is like, it's more toward the things with character building. Like, how do you have the character of a leader? How do you're humble, you listen. I mean, especially for me, I will laughingly say, I was leading people who had taught me in fourth and fifth grade, like just as a concept. Like, I mean, and I'm old school. Actually, one of the people had actually spanked me like as a fifth grade student. I'm old school. I know it's crazy. Like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that happened in schools. But I'm like now leading her. I'm just being like, this is the craziest thing I can experience. But at some point in those situations, you just have to come in with humility. Like, there's no way for me to act like I know more than you. She knows I don't know more than her. But if I come in, just with that humility, that's great. And I think the other thing I would say there too, Sean, that I think is different, even in this world like podcast, the stuff that you're doing, for me, even back 10, 15 years ago, we go back to some of those places, was most of the leadership stuff out there, a lot of times it was for people that were like way beyond, people who had done major organizational turnarounds and all of that kind of stuff. And that's what I was reading. And the problem sometimes was trying to correlate that to my situation could be really difficult. And that's what I think is fun about the content that's out there now, is that people can find others who are closer to their experience than, the guy who ran GM and Ford and all these other big, organizations.
No, yeah, such good points. And I love the fact you brought up the character building, because if that is really at the heart of the work that I do with leaders, is really getting to shift that mindset from thinking of themselves as a manager to a leader. And
Yeah.
being a leader is someone that you have to become, right? You have to become someone that others want to follow. And if you don't have, commitment, character, confidence, like no one's following you. That's where you have to start from, and then you can start building those additional skill sets through experience and education. But if you think that the stuff on that periphery that you see is what leadership is, and not realize that it's really the core of the person underneath it is what makes people follow you, because like you said, you are inherently as a leader going to step in, and I mean, whether you're working in manufacturing or whether and you step on and you're going to manage this factory, well, that foreman who's been on the floor for 20 years knows the nook and cranny and how that thing functions way better than you.
Yeah.
And he doesn't care that you don't, but he wants to know that you're going to lead him and the organization from a place of strength and a place of character and a place of humility. And I think that's so important to bring to leaders. So I love the fact that you brought that up as a key component.
Yeah.
And I think another thing you brought up that I'd like to, as we move toward even what you're doing now, is, in every organization, we all have a role to play in a group of people. And as leaders, we play a particular role. Our job is to lead, to provide guidance, to provide communication, not to necessarily know everything or be a part of everything. But if we don't do our job, nobody else can do theirs. So when you look at role clarity how do you approach that as a leader steps in and maybe tries to define what is my role as the leader in the
Yeah.
organization before I even start looking at, well, what is everybody else supposed to do?
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest even turns when I'm working with a team or working with somebody is understanding that like oftentimes this could be too strong, but oftentimes the vaguest place of role clarity is actually with the leader. And I think that is not always their fault. I think we live in a world where like if we were to list out what's expected of a leader, I mean the list just grows and grows and grows and every year there's a new book of what it should be. And so it's
I was
just
going to say, I'll grab a book over here and we'll just like open it and be like, you need to
yes.
know all this, and just start
Yes.
stacking them up on the desk.
And I think the thing is it becomes this like superhuman kind of mentality. And that's one of the things we could dive into and talk about role clarity with everybody is over time, role clarity becomes this fantasy list. It's not like a reality picture of like what your day feels, but it's this fantasy list. And there's a certain point where that list gets so big, so broad that no one can do it all. And at that point, I think you start to lose some accountability, even for yourself of, I'm supposed to do 22 things, so I do them all like okay. Instead of those few things that as a leader you're dialed into and you say, I trust that if I do these consistently again and again and again, it's going to build a strong team, build a strong culture. So that all that aside, so when it comes to a leader, I think it's the same rule. And that's what I'd always look at a leader and say is we've got to get clear on your role clarity. What are the 4 key roles that you play, that you have to play? What is the ownership that you have to take? And then what's success going to look like for you? And a lot of times that's so key to moving toward the team is they've got to get clear on what do I have to be doing? And sometimes that means obviously it's time to delegate and hand some things off that can't be on your plate, or to cut away some fluff and whatever that's been added over the years to just kind of get added onto your plate. And so, yeah, it just begins with them, because if I can get a leader to see that clarity, when I do it's on one page. If I can get to see their own on one page, and then they realize, and I'll say to them, if you did this, if you crush it at these 4 roles and this one page, where would the business be? And every single time they say, we'd have no problems. We would have 0 problems. So if I can get them to say that, then they see the value of providing that for their team.
Yeah. And I'm going to stop you there because I heard this when we talked before, but most people are probably like, wait a minute, 4 roles. There's only 4 things that I need to do in my job, because that's not what I'm being told.
Yeah.
So, and not only that, 4 roles, but you said 1 page. So my whole job should be on 1 page. So let's stop there. What does that 1 page look like?
Yeah, okay, so I want to make sure that I don't do a bait and switch here. I can't stand on these things where somebody comes in and like makes a big statement and then they're like, but actually it's 22 pages behind it. So what I'm saying there too is a couple things. When I say role clarity, I don't think that means listing every single detail that could fall under your job. That's not what I'm talking about. There is a place for that. And I always say there's a place for job descriptions in hiring. I do something with teams when I'm working a little more in depth where we do some responsibility outlines. But what I've come to find is those are used once a year, once every couple years. They're just used very rarely. They're not used to guide the day-to-day, week-to-week, functioning in that role. And so that's what I would say on that part. So I want to make sure I clarify that. But you also said there, okay, so only 4 roles. So here's what I do when I'm having that conversation with a leader. No matter, and I would argue whether we look at the next president of the United States or, the person who's going to be working in my yard later or whoever it would be, they both have 4 roles. The question is just how broad those roles are versus how focused and narrow they are. So for a leader, what I look and say is like, I can't get to 4 roles. I've had people antagonistically look at me and say, my job is impossible. There's no way. The thing is, it can fit in 4 buckets. It's just how big those buckets are going to be. And so what I find with leaders is once we do that, what they come to find is like some of these buckets are just really broad. Well, they're frustrated because they're not narrowing in. I can't focus on those few things. It's like, because you've agreed to these huge, massive, these massive buckets as far as your 4 roles. And so that's what I would say there. And when I'm teaching this, what I can say is the goal is for that 4 roles to be a higher and higher percentage of your job. I've walked into some people where those 4 roles made up 60% of what they did. But when you look at that, what I'd say is like, I said, so how much better would you be if this was 80% of what you did? how much better would you be doing? I'm like, oh, I'd be doing so much better. So how do we get there? And so as role clarity is a snapshot of where you are, sometimes what I'm doing is when I'm working with Sean, like we outline what are those 4 roles now, and it's super broad, super expansive. And we say, so 6 months from now, what would we like those? What do those need to be if the business is growing and you're doing your very best work? And they say that. Well, then it's like, so how do we go from here to here? And so that's when I say that, it's just to give a framework. It's a clarity picture. And so it is tough. It's tough for people the first time because the way role clarity works in most situations that I've seen is clarity is just adding more things to a list. Adding more, when it comes to no one ever is taking things off their list where you're only adding to the list. And so that's why people look like there's no way you go on one page. It can be on one page, and sometimes that's just an eye-opening experience to see how your position is playing out. So that's what I would say there.
And it reminds me of a few things. It reminds me of the Pareto principle, right? Mm-hmm. That we get 80% of our results from 20% of our work, and that's something that my business coach talks to me about too. He's like, what are those 20%, and just keep refining. Yeah. What if we just did those things? And that's exactly what you're talking about, is how much of our 80% of our time is being spent on things that aren't delivering results. And these 20% are the ones that are delivering the majority. Yeah. So how do we get really focused on the things that matter? And to pull, what I love about this 4 roles concept and just your general push to toward clarity and simplicity is, when I was in the military and special operations, we put together a mission. And within this mission, we would have the mission statement, and then we would have 4 to 7 key tasks. Yeah. And something was only a key task if we didn't do it, we had mission failure. Mm-hmm. And so and underneath that, then you had, like to your point, specified tasks. There were implied tasks. We weren't going to list out load rounds in your magazine, put the magazine in your vest. Yeah. Like we're not, then we'd be writing, a 700-page book for every op order. But there's a lot of things that are implied, but we could get it down to like, and I love the fact you came up with 4, because it's 4 to 7. And if you don't, I think the key there is if everyone on the team didn't know those by heart, then it's worthless. And it's the same thing at an organization. If everyone can't say they know off the top of their head, these are the 4 things I'm responsible for. These are, 3 or 5, whatever it is. But like, if they don't know that, then, and that's not directing their decision-making every single time, then it doesn't matter. So you can have the list of 22 things, but if it's not in their head when they're deciding to prioritize and how to take action, they're not going to get anything done. And again, that simplicity is so important, because simplicity and focus, I think, especially in this day and age that we're so distracted, it's a superpower. It is. And it's a simple plan is a resilient plan. And I learned that at U.S. Army Ranger School when we would plan raids as students and we were hungry and sleep deprived and not thinking right. And we'd all come these elaborate, like we were some, 5-star general planning D-Day to do like a 20-person raid. And we're going to have these people here. And then when this happens and this is going to happen, and then air support's going to come. It's just like this over. And then every time we had this complex plan, one thing goes wrong and it all falls apart. Yep. If you make your plan too complex, a complex plan is actually less resilient and less successful than a very simple plan that can flex and have freedom within a framework. And so I love the way you're bringing that simplicity and focus, but freedom within a very simple framework that actually makes the organization more resilient, not less resilient.
Yeah. I mean, I've got to memorize this study because it's one that really validates this too. I'm drawing a blank right now, but it's looking at just our ability to remember things. And this is coming from perspective of a leader who's listening to this. And it's, I'm so frustrated. I can't remember this right now, but it's that it's just like a phone number, our ability to remember 3 or 4 things. And it's kind of like 3, 4, a bunch. And so there's this point where cognitively it just becomes vague. And so what I think about for a leader is, I always say, so imagine you're sitting around a table, let's go 5 people or 10 people around that table. And I were to look at you and say, hey, name me the 4 key roles, that person, that person, that person. I mean, right there, if just at 4, they're talking about 40, 50 things. Well, how valuable is it for them if they could name those that quick? Susie's responsible for boom, 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 boom. Jake's responsible for, and just naming off those four. Well, that versus they're in charge of marketing versus they're in charge of, these are the four things, the four roles in marketing that I'm counting on from you. That's just a whole different perspective, especially for someone, when I'm talking to someone maybe in a small business and even in a big organization too, just the ability to have a clarity with that person of what we're talking about, and that I can walk down the hallway. I know therefore, we can talk about them is so incredibly valuable. It's what I've come to find. And so that's where the simplicity comes in. Sometimes, one of the pushbacks that even I'll get is they'll say, this just isn't enough. We don't have everything listed out. We don't. And what I love to ask there is, okay, so if we list out, I agree, for most people, we could probably list out. I mean, I've seen lists of like 75, 80 for like real jobs, normal people, like 75, 80 things that fall under them. At some point, I'm like, so do we see the issue here? But oftentimes what I'll say is, when we look at that list, tell me the first ones to come off. And almost every time, Sean, it's actually the most highly valuable activities. What never comes off is all of the busy work and checking on this, doing that. Almost, that's the stuff that happens. The thing that ends up on the one page, oftentimes they're the first things to go out the window when things get busy and things aren't happening. And so for me, it's like, so what if we reverse this? And I said, because when I'm done on this one page, the way the framework works, it has 4 roles. There's 4 responsibility statements that apply to those, and then pictures of success, 3 for each. So that ends up with 12 pictures of success for their 4 roles. And that's kind of fast, but that's where we end up there. Well, I look at somebody and say, that's a lot. If I name off 12 things that you're looking to be successful at in your position for any of us, I mean, that's a lot listed out right there. It's a lot for me to coach them on as a leader, and it's a lot for them to look at on a weekly basis and say, hey, how am I doing at all of these, as I'm going through my job? And so that's kind of my pushback, and why I think the simplicity option is more valuable than the other option, being that the sign of success is that I've listed every single thing possible off that they could possibly need to do.
And so that was 4 roles, 4 responsibility statements, and then 4 success statements.
Well, there's 3 for each of those. So if
3?
If you line them up when I'm teaching that, you'll see 4 boxes across the top, then 4 boxes below that, and then under those, there's 3 signs of success. And the reason why what I wrote this down too, and as we were preparing, is what I've come to find is, just even in that simple framework, oftentimes role clarity is more important for the leader than it is for the person on the team. And I think sometimes when we think about role clarity, we all think of like, they just have to know what to do. And if we really dig in as a leader, like, we have to know how to communicate what it is that we want to see from them, the ownership we want them to take. And without a simple framework, I don't know how you do that well. How you don't fall into the end of like the moving goalpost. So whatever they do, there's always like a new thing they should have been doing, or you're always, tweaking something. And so for me, oftentimes what I come to find is this is more revelatory, more, insightful for the leader, because now they're able to really clearly communicate what is they're asking someone to do and the ownership they want them to take.
And I think you said something really key there, which was, it's not just the actions, the things I need to do, because ultimately what the organization needs is a result. Mm-hmm. Like those success statements, right? Like, it's ultimately not me taking these different actions. It's what actions do I need to take to have this result that impacts the organization? It's like, how do we measure that success? Yeah. And I agree. I see that with a lot of my clients as well, that here's what I think it leads to, right? I think that you have a lack of role clarity around expectations for leaders.
Yeah.
I think then that leads to a lack of accountability for leaders.
Yeah.
And then when things go wrong, it's easier to get rid of the individual contributors who have distinct measurables.
Yeah.
And then you create a culture that's keeping around mediocrity in the most important positions.
Yeah.
That's what I think happens because of exactly what you're talking about, of identifying what is a leader actually supposed to be doing, and what role and function are they being held to account for within the organization.
Yeah, No, absolutely. And that's why when we're talking about, one of the language things that I will often use is, when we talk about those responsibilities or those ownership statements as I'm teaching someone to use them is really being learning the language of taking ownership for outcomes. And a lot of times people will say, "Hey, I need these people to take an ownership for this, or I wish they had an ownership mentality." It's kind of like one of the legendary things of like, I'm the only one who sees this as an owner. But when you really listen to the language, like you're not communicating the language of ownership for outcomes, you're ownership for task. Hey, I need you to do this, this, and this. Instead of, you're responsible for developing a high functioning, high producing team. That's what you're responsible for. It's not, these tasks that I need you to do with the team, but hey, at the end, like, is this team that? Are you developing that kind of team? If not, then we need to talk about, what that is. And that happens everywhere, but using the, ownership for outcomes, that language is, I think is one of the key parts that speaks to what you're saying about how this begins to like cascade down through teams or organizations.
Yeah, I come back to that freedom within a framework for what you're saying here, because it is the more control and the less trust we have in our people to have them figure out a problem, the less ownership they have over the outcome, right? If I tell
Yeah.
you, do one, do two, do three, do four, and then you come back and it doesn't work, well, guess what? That's on me now.
Yeah.
Because look, I did the four things, but I would say, no, I need you to figure this bigger problem out,
Yeah.
and I trust you to do that. Let me know what resources you need. Then the person moves forward, and then they say, all right, this worked, this didn't, but they feel more ownership
Yeah.
over it because you gave them the trust and framework. And it was, they got to come up with how to solve the problem. And instead of being overly controlling and obsessive about uh, the solution, as long as we stay laser focused on what is the problem we're trying to solve,
Yep.
and then empower our people to develop the solution, honestly, most times, right? They're closer to the problem. They'll have a better solution.
Yeah.
They'll fix it, and
Yeah.
it'll make us look better because our we actually empowered and look at the people we have underneath us. Because I think that ultimately we judge great leaders on the leaders they create.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just rereading for a resource that I'm creating, rereading the chapter in Good to Great where Jim Collins talks about basically first who, then what, and getting the legendary line, getting the right people on the bus and in the right seats that every business and leadership person has heard 1,000 times. And I was reminded one of the concepts, and I will humbly admit that I remember believing this was, he talks about one of the struggles is, the genius with 1,000 helpers, or 1,000 minions, or whatever the line is right there. I think what we're talking about there is just continually coming face to face with that of like the humility of, I'm not the genius that just needs 1,000 people to go run and do what it is that I say. That's just not a winning solution in the long term, even for the most charismatic, amazing, natural, kind of leaders in the world. At some point that does not work, either they're gone or whatever that may be. And so I think what we're talking there is just looking at that and saying, like, am I setting this up around myself where I'm the genius and all these people need to just do what I say, or I'm wanting to develop and raise up leaders around me who can solve problems and bring solutions and us discuss them, and building that type of culture.
Mm-hmm. I see. I know you work a lot with small business owners
Yeah.
and nonprofits and things like that, and especially at that level, so much. Usually, it's a founder or something like that. Not always, but it could
Yeah.
be, right. But or it could be the division chief in a larger organization. But they become. You never want to be the bottleneck of your own organization,
Yeah.
right? And that's what you become when you try to be that genius with 1,000 minions. Is you become the limiting variable to growth in your organization.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes leaders don't know they're doing that. They do it, unconsciously. And then unfortunately, I think some do it out of a scarcity mindset because
Mm.
if I make myself invaluable, if I hoard, power and information, then I become indispensable. And what you're really saying is like, I'm more important than mission.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I heard. I'll be careful how I say this, but I heard someone who had talked about clarity with a leader, and a leader said, "I like things to be a little bit muddy," and I like my mind was like, what did you just say? And it was exactly what we're talking about. Muddy so that he remains the bottleneck. I don't want it to be so clear that people don't need me. I like a little muddy where they have to come to me. Everything has to come to me. I, I mean, to me, that concept, what its long term impact, what it does to us but I think we all need to look at it and say, as leaders, just a self evaluation. Is there any place where I'm not, promoting clarity? I'm not bringing clarity because I want to stay at the center of everything. I'm not ready to raise up leaders, to develop leaders, to have a culture where I'm not the end all be all for everything. I think it's a question we have to ask, because there are some points where that's a hard thing to die to, but obviously the long term impact of letting go of that is so huge.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it really goes back to that. To me, that's not really a leader.
No,
That's not
no,
leadership at all.
no, no.
And it also, you're not retaining top talent.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
You're only people who are going to be there are the people who want to be told exactly what to do, don't want to have to solve problems, don't want to have to think for themselves, don't want to have to develop, don't have ambition to move up and on and grow. And I mean, I guess I don't know. If you work at the DMV, maybe that's okay, but and most organizations,
yeah.
that's simply not gonna cut it.
No, not with the pressure that's for innovation, for efficiency, for all of those things to succeed at this point in our current environment. Like, there's just that might have worked sometime way back in the day, but with the pressures and that are on small businesses, big organizations right now, I mean, you're just not going to last long doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think uh, especially now, but in the last decade, maybe two, but especially the last decade, with the way the information is so freely available and shared now, right? Like it maybe in the a couple of decades ago, you could be, well, I know everything, and because I've been here longer and I can hoard this information, and nobody knows what's going on in the outside world, and it's like, man, everybody knows everything all the time right now, and if you don't, your business is going to fail. And with the advent of AI and empowering and productivity, it's like if you think that you're going to stay in control of this thing because you have more information, like you're in for a rude awakening, because there's going to be a 23-year-old on his phone who's going to come up and show you exactly the new way to do something.
Absolutely. No, 100%. Yeah, the game has definitely changed. And I think it's what we're seeing too with, I'm not a researcher, but still, when you look at the research about, the generations that are coming up and entering the workforce, all of those things, the things that are going to work is still being a humble leader, serving others, challenging them with clarity, coaching them, not being the person on high telling them what to do. And part of it is, it's not, I don't think it is just a generational issue and just how they were raised, but also it is this information and knowledge. And I mean, the stuff that they're going to know that we had to learn, through a lot more time, it's just going to be different. And the things they can produce, I mean, I think that's even now, I mean, in my just little hacking around with AI and doing whatever, I think, oh, this is amazing. I can't imagine what they will be able to produce and do 5 years from now. And so, as a leader, but for clarity, like, I have to come like, hey, here's the problem. I would love you to help me figure out what the solution is, because they probably are going to be able to find the solution way faster and way more creatively than I have, and it's going to be things that I can't even think of right now. And so for me, having that mindset and that perspective and working with them and serving them is going to, that's what's going to allow me to continue to grow in leadership and to have great people around me.
Yeah, exactly. Creating becoming the person that other people want to follow, right?
Absolutely.
True leadership there.
Yeah.
So those leaders, as you look at that, your process and you bring that in, if I'm I have my own company or I'm in a mid-sized business, I'm like, you're right. I don't have great role clarity. I would love that. It sounds, amazing. Like what are the steps? What are the first steps I need to take in order to start implementing role clarity inside of my business so we can be more effective?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, like, you have to have a framework. You have to have a plan for creating role clarity. Like, that's where it all begins is, so what are you going to do? And so what I would often look and say is, the three things that I'm challenging anyone to do, I think this is where I would start, because I want teams to have role clarity. I would love to work with them. I'd love to serve them. That's fantastic. But if I don't, I still know people are going to do better work, and we're going to have a better workforce and better leaders if this happens. Is you got to make sure that you're creating focus for them. You said it earlier, superpower. I love the work of Cal Newport around all of this, but I mean, focus is it's a superpower. And so, how do I create a team that I'm helping them focus? I'm calling them to take ownership, clear ownership, and then I'm painting a picture of success. And so when somebody's looking there and saying, "How do I create role clarity?" Whatever format they use, how are we creating focus? How are we communicating ownership? And there are clear pictures of success? That has to be there. And from that point, once you commit to that, is taking the step as a leader. The leadership level we start. Are we clear about where we are? And then how do we communicate this then to our team? And my encouragement there, in situations you're talking about, are just looking and not complicating it. If you go and look at, I've been down these rabbit holes, all the different job descriptions and all that kind of stuff. Just be very careful, because it can get so elaborate that it never gets completed. It never gets done. When I'm looking at a leader, the leaders I'm talking to said, if you can't complete role clarity for a team member in less than an hour, I don't think you're going to stick with it very long. That's my experience. And so that's why for me, I mean, mine's been pared down multiple times with this challenge of, once you learn how to do this, you should be able to do this in an hour. And so those would be where I would start, Sean, is having a framework, making sure it answers those three big questions, and then making sure it's simple enough. And you'll know it by doing it for yourself and for the leadership team. If it takes you days and all this weeks to get that done, I think most people know, like, I'm not going to keep doing this. I'm not going to stick with it. And so making it simple enough to going in from there, once you commit to you have it, then you can look and communicating it to your team.
As we do that, have you ever found where you work with a client and they get to role clarity and they realize there's some like structural issues, like there's some operational issues where like two people, maybe there's redundancy or there's gaps now in what other people thought they were going to do, and how do we go about identifying and working through those?
Yeah, 100% you're going to find that. One of the warnings I give too is, when you get really clear, like, there's some information that you're going to find out that's not going to be easy information to deal with. You're going to find out that there are people who you thought were carrying a bigger load than they carry. You're also going to find out there are probably some people on your team who are carrying a much bigger load than they should, which is, I think, important. We in a culture of burnout and losing great people, whatever it is. I mean, I've looked at leader and said, so when I look at this, like, this is more than a job. This is more than one person can do. And we have to address this. And sometimes even in that process, what I've come to find is, I mean, somebody has said, hey, I was about to quit. Like, I was about to quit and leave because I was coming in here on Saturdays. I was working all these evenings and all of this stuff. And a leader didn't even know. They didn't even realize it. They just, so how it happens. And so, yeah, I think when you do that, I often say there too, is when I work with a leader is, like I said earlier, role clarity is a picture of reality. So when we go in, it's not, don't tell me what you think this person, like the dream scenario. Let's put clarity. What are they doing right now? Like, let's get clarity of their job. And if that's not what you need it to be, let's talk about taking the time. A lot of times you can't, people, especially in a smaller business, you can't just change that tomorrow. In 3 months, how do I move to getting you to exactly where we need you to be? And using that framework, I'm able to oftentimes show that and see, okay, visually, this has to come off so that there can be more time on that. Or, like you said, which happens everywhere, the amount of like redundancy of just, why are you both working on that? Like, why is this happening that way? So at that point, just you work together to figure out, how do we get, remove those things, getting the most out of both people, just go through that process.
And how do you use this when it comes to ongoing, coaching and development and, I actually like, I try to move us away from the term even of performance evaluations, but more to coaching. But
yes,
still, there needs to be some sort of accountability within that coaching program. Like, so what does ongoing, use of role clarity look like in an organization?
Yeah, I think it's a two places where I think it surprises people how to use it is, one is, I've never experienced it. I'm sure somewhere somebody's got the HR department of the world. For most people, job descriptions don't come out. So even if you just, when I'm working a team, like even if every 90 days somebody is just looking at the role clarity, like it's a 5x improvement over what they've ever done before. And so a couple things is bringing that back up, because I also believe in the current climate and culture, like this idea of a position staying the same for 5 or 7 years, like it's just not going to happen. I mean, too much changes in what everyone is doing. And so a couple things is looking at it and tweaking it. This, 6 months in, 12 months in, hey, we really need this job to be more over here. Why don't you take more ownership there? We're going to change this one role out. Hey, these three are spot on. But we're going to take this one role out and add something different. Or, maybe one role has become so big, we need to split it into two parts of your job. And so a lot of that happens. And so it gives, I love doing that with a leader, because a lot of times what will happen is, that thing I said about adding things on, I always look and say, like, you don't get to write something on the back of this page. It's got to be on the front. Like, no secret roles back there. There's always somebody with a secret role. This doesn't really count. I just do this on the side. It's like, no, we don't do that. Like, and so what I will look and say is, like, if leaders say, hey, I really need somebody spending more time in this area. Well, if we split this into two, what could that look like? If they, just going deeper, more excellence in that role. And so we'll talk about that. So using it that way. But then the big one is, I agree with you. I don't love performance reviews, but as far as the starting place that I have is a monthly review with a team member, and role clarity to me is just the perfect place, perfect document to use in that avenue. Because for a busy leader, especially someone who is like not a full-time manager maybe, but for a busy leader, I take 5 minutes and I glance at that document. And let's just say I pick one role or I pick a couple different things. I already have great questions to ask them. Hey, tell me about how this is going. Tell me about, some opportunities for us to improve in this area. And so I'm not just going in there and having kind of a random conversation, or they're scared it's going to be me picking on the things that they're not doing well or whatever that may be. It sets it up to have great coaching and development conversations about the specific things that I've asked them to do, the ownership I want them to take, the success that we want to see. And so that's the other place where I have seen it most beneficial is, especially in smaller organizations or small businesses, when you ask that question, hey, how often are you having, consistent development conversations with your team? Rarely do I get the answer of, we do it weekly or monthly or, whatever. And so what I look at a leader and say is like, so if once a month you coach them and develop them around their role, around what it is that you're calling them to do, and where you want to see them grow, how much of an uptick would that be? Every time. Like, yeah, it would be huge. It'd make a big difference. And so that's the other place where I see it, is just on that level of having high quality, starting with monthly conversations, is huge.
I love that. And it's also something I'm going to consider, because I also push for monthly coaching, developmental coaching sessions, and then quarterly written, more formal. And so it's that same sort of pace that you're talking about, but using it around this role clarity format really gives you a really quality place to start. And I also love the fact that, again, to go into that simplicity, being resilient, you mentioned revisiting these priorities, because it does, right? Like, maybe if you're the VP of whatever, and now all of a sudden there's a new initiative and that's starting to grow, maybe that becomes, one of your key roles, right? It becomes one of your key tasks. And that means, but if you don't, that scope creep happens, where they just starts adding, well, yeah, I'm responsible for that. But all right, well, what else did you drop off? Well, nothing. Okay, well, the next big project, and now you already got that, right? And all of a sudden, now you either need to, as you said, redefine buckets, and that means probably you need more people or more resources to address it. But that's how we burn out leaders, is we have scope creep as a consultant with projects, but we have scope creep when it comes to jobs as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I love that question. The question's been so popular, I think, for a long time. Hey, so if we're going to do this, what are you going to not do? Well, most of the time people, they just don't know where to look. Like, it's just off your head. Like, I could stop doing this. Well, that's why I love it being on a piece of paper. And I am kind of old school in that it's on a piece of paper. It's like, if I want to add this, because I'll do this when I'm coaching a leader who's talking about a team member. So what's coming off? And they have to wrestle with that. You have to look at it and say, okay, and then you have to communicate, hey, I'm okay. I want us to do less of this because I want us to do, start putting our energy toward that. And so without there being some type of framework that you're able to like move the pieces around, I also say good luck, getting that right as far as what's coming off the list.
Yeah, man. Lee, this has been awesome. I feel like just like when we had our sort of pre-call, we could just do you and I could just
Yeah.
nerd out on this for hours. But I think that our listeners are also getting a ton out of. I hope they're getting a ton out of this. I know I have every time we talk. So if someone's listening to this and they're saying, "I need that in my company, my business right now," like how do they get a hold of you to have that initial conversation?
Yeah, the easiest thing is just to go to rollclarity.co, and come there to the website, and I will look to try to have something up, especially for your listeners there. A couple resources just to learn more about Roll Clarity, but then also asking the question of role confusion, like what is it costing you? And that's one of the big things we'll see there is how it's costing you time, money, even cultural costs there. And so yeah, I think coming there, and I would love to have a conversation, kind of free strategy call. We dig in to see what your current situation is, and then talk about what's the next step. And because I love helping leaders find their next step toward experiencing the freedom of role clarity.
Absolutely, that's going to be huge. I'm going to go review it myself. I look forward to seeing that stuff. And good luck to you, man. And I look forward to hopefully working together in the future and having this conversation because I think you're doing really powerful work out there.
Yes, well, Sean, I really, really appreciate it. It's been a blast. It's like the highlight of my week. So thanks for having me on.
All right, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, later.